Good afternoon. How you guys doing? Does everybody feel like you recovered a little bit? We're like, yesterday, it's so funny. Like just the traffic thing yesterday is like we all are adjusting our life around this, like how to like protect our space. How many people just stayed home last night? Right? Like I feel like that kind of became the strategy this year for whatever reason. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But anyway, great. It's great to have you guys here. I was thinking this morning, I've been teaching the last few years at a seminary, and the the classes I teach are this intersection between two things, spiritual formation and leadership. And it's an interesting intersection. And to me, I'm excited to teach there because I feel like that's where it's at. Because I feel like this is like two things that God is doing all the time in all of us, is working on our hearts, forming us to be more like him, but always through this lens of how do we make an impact in the world that we live in. Some of you may be sitting there thinking, I'm not a leader, but I would beg to differ. That our lives are meant for this purpose of influencing the world around us. That all of us are not just receiving light, but emitting light, shining this light. And thinking about what then does this look like? And to me, the book of Acts is in so many ways our mission statement. Like these people sent out into the world to influence and to go, well, what about now? And you're like, same deal. Like what they're doing in Acts, we are continuing to do as we are the church bringing this light of the gospel into the world. And as Luke is telling this story of Acts, the story of the early church, there's all kinds of characters that come in and out, people that he's following along with, getting their stories down. But as we see towards the end, it becomes almost entirely focused on one guy, this guy Paul. And Paul's story, Paul is somebody who we see commissioned, that God takes him from the opposite extremes as the zealot persecuting the church to becoming one of its most greatest and influential leaders. And God does this by transforming his heart. And as he's nearing the end, Luke wants us to make sure that we see this, that we don't miss this. And so what we see is as Paul is nearing Jerusalem, is Luke is pointing out all these ways that he's following really quite literally in the footsteps of Jesus. That Jesus too returned to Jerusalem. That Jesus too went towards danger, not away from it. That Jesus too was misunderstood by the mob. And as we hear those words in our passage last week, this crowd that shouts out against Paul, like away with him. And Luke is saying the very same words that were spoken to Jesus. And what he wants us to understand is this way of traveling towards the cross is the way for all of us. That Jesus didn't just do this on our behalf so we wouldn't have to, but instead he modeled something for us, a way of loving sacrificially that is tied directly to our assignment. This is how we bring the good news to the world. We do it by bringing this sort of compassionate, self-sacrificing love, which, as it turns out, does not come naturally to us. It has to be something that God does in us, this kind of fruit. And today, as we look at Paul's defense, he's going to stand in front of the people. He's come all the way back, that his friends have been telling him, don't go to Jerusalem. This is a bad idea. Danger awaits. In fact, they've been giving prophetic words to him saying, danger awaits. Do not go to Jerusalem. And Paul's going to say, danger does await, but that's the direction that I'm going. And Paul walks right into the temple, into the hands of this mob. He gets beaten by them. He ends up getting saved by these Roman centurions that like come and pull him to safety. And what we see here in Paul is he's going to say, let me speak to him. That Paul is going to then stand in front of the mob and quiet them and then share his defense. And what we realize is that his defense really isn't much of a defense. It's a witness. This is Paul stepping into his vocation. And he does it with such composure. And I thought that's, I think, what I want to look at today. The composure of Paul. Because as we think about leadership and our trajectory of leadership, it is going to be in a way that looks like the cross. But the fruit that it's going to bear is this sort of inner strength that, unfortunately, I feel like is lacking so much in the world today. This sort of calm presence that he exhibits. There's a movie that came out years ago. This guy, Guy Ritchie, made this movie called Snatch. Did anybody see Snatch? It's kind of a violent movie, so probably not appropriate to be sharing from the pulpit. But it has this one, when I think of composure, it has this scene that I just, immediately comes to mind. These two gangsters, Turkish and Tommy, they picked this guy that was going to throw a fight. And they were doing it as a favor to some other mobster. And their fighter, Mickey, Brad Pitt, is this bare-knuckle fighter who was supposed to go in and throw the fight and then doesn't, knocks the other guy out with one punch. And they're like, oh, we are in such trouble. And so they're fleeing from this situation. And as they're kind of out the door running, a gunshot goes off, right? And if you've seen the movie, there's this brilliant freeze frame where the two mobsters are like just terrified. And then there's Brad Pitt, and he's looking right at the camera, right? And in that freeze frame, they're like, what does he know, right? The fighter doesn't flinch. What information does he have that keeps him so composed? And as I was thinking about this, it reminds me of that. You have this total chaos. You have this mob of people accusing Paul, responding violently, beating him. You've got these centurions that think, oh, this is this Egyptian terrorist. They're trying to get control of the situation. There's only one guy that's calm in this, and it's the person who's just experienced the beating. But he knows something. What is it that he knows? What is it that gives him such composure? Okay, that being said, let's go to our passage here. Cilia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. As the high priest and all the council can themselves testify, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you're persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name. When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr, Stephen, was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him. He's not fit to live. The word of the Lord. All right. Here we see this again. Hopefully you see this composure, this profound presence of Paul, who can stand in this place and exhibit this deep sort of peace and self-control. Isn't it interesting that he says, here's my defense, and then he basically walks through all the things that he's guilty of. That this defense is not about his innocence. This defense is not about how they've misjudged him. This defense is not about how they wrongfully attacked him. This defense is like, hey, I'm one of you guys. In fact, maybe worse. That my transgressions led me to this place of persecuting the church, of persecuting you guys. Remember that many of these are believers that are standing there. What he does in his defense is not defend, he witnesses. And as we see, this is what he was called to do. Paul was called to witness. Part of this presence that he exhibits is there is no defense. That instead we see a heart that is free to just respond back in love. Brothers, fathers, he says. One of my favorite guys on leadership is this guy, Edwin Friedman, who happens to be a rabbi. But Friedman talks about how leadership really influence is presence. And that the kind of presence that produces the sort of fruit that we're after is what he would call non-anxious presence. That non-anxious presence has this sort of effect of a calm just by its being there. I was thinking, I shared this in the first service, that I think it was Travis came back from Hitching Post and he was saying that one of the things he learned is that they have this, the question was asked like, who's in charge here amongst all these horses? And they were going, it's the one who's like exhibiting the least effort maybe, or the ease. That there's this quiet horse there in the center, the older horse, that's like keeping everything in order just simply by its presence. That non-anxious presence, that is maturity, that is composure. That's something that doesn't just come from a quick class. That is the fruit of a life lived in a certain way. You guys watching the World Cup? Anybody? I mean, the composure of the goalie from Cape Verde, this, I'm going to get his name wrong, Vazinha. Are you guys following this guy? I mean, he's the hero of the thing. You're like, it used to be like, well, everybody's talking about Messi or an Mbappe, and you're like, no. Now everybody's talking about the goalie for this little no-name team that unbelievably made it in, and now is playing Argentina and like striking this look of terror in Argentina. And this goalie, as it turns out, is like, I think he's an electrician and a bus driver, right? Who was also a goalie, and just dominating on this world stage. And you look at this and everybody's like 40 years old. Like, who's going to play that guy? Like, he barely made the team. And yet you're going, what you see in some of these older players is composure. It's maturity. It's experience, right? In some ways, you can't get this overnight. You can't. It's not talent. It's something that takes time and energy. In so many ways, this is what we see in Paul. It is just this guy who just stands there in the goal and blocks the shots. This maturity that's taken a lifetime. And he's going to walk them through the story of this. That he was that guy that was like achieving everything, had every single accolade, that had all the degrees and all of that. And he's going to refer to it as rubbish. He's going to realize that all that zeal was causing harm to God, not helping. And when Jesus speaks to this man, Ananias, who's the one who goes and like was terrified but faithfully prays over Paul, and Paul's sight returns, Jesus says to Ananias that this guy is going to suffer. That part of this calling that Paul is going to be, this road that he's going to walk, is going to require a lot of pain. But in that, you can hear James, kind of Paul's foil for a lot of this, but James saying, oh, consider it joy. Why? That suffering, that challenge develops something in you, something that you can't get any other way. That composure, that strength, that stability, that non-anxious presence is a heart that has been formed. And it's taken a lifetime for Paul. In fact, as he writes, he's going to say, not that I've ever attained it, but I'm pressing on. That our lives really are about this formation of this inner sort of strength, this heart capacity to love, to respond just like Jesus did. Paul's ability to not defend himself, to me, is profound. especially because I think this is something I struggle so much with. That when I'm misunderstood, like it just gets under my skin. When somebody says something about me that's not true, I want to just like set the record straight. It creates this sort of inner sort of turbulence in my life. And you see Paul just not worried about it. That there's an ambivalence towards those things. And some of this is the result of just enduring and having a heart that is free. I don't know how you guys do with that sort of criticism, but Eric Zentler told me the other day, he's like, ask ChatGPT to roast you. And I was like, oh, all right. Like, I typed this in. And Chat actually said to me, like, you asked for it. Like, brrr, like, so I'll just read you a couple. You somehow manage to preach against overthinking in sermons that require a table of contents, 3 philosophers, 2 desert fathers, a Tolkien reference, and at least one quote from Hans Urs von Balthasar that nobody can pronounce. Your favorite compliment is probably, I didn't like your sermon until Tuesday. Every week starts with, I'm just wondering if there's a way to tie Acts 22 together with John 1, Fowler Stages of Faith, Don Quixote, Cruciformity, Sherlock Holmes, and maybe Phoebe Bridgers. I'm like, that's not funny. It's like stupid. Like, oh yeah, well, you're stupid. You're not even real. Yeah, it's like, it's not intelligence, it's artificial intelligence. Right? You're like, I don't want people to like go there, right? I like, can't we just think, let's just think happy thoughts about Jeff, right? Like we have this sort of thin veneer and we have sensitive hearts. That tenderness is not something to take lightly, but the truth is, there is something that happens when we go through disappointments, when we face challenges, when life is unfair. And constantly we're thinking, like, Jesus, didn't you die so I wouldn't have to go through all of this? And he's like, no. Like, I died to model the way. Paul's going to say, and we talked about this last week, these are the 2 things I want to know. I want to know Christ and I want to know him crucified. Right? That life is about laying aside all the other things, all the distractions, all the self-protections, all of this, and just keeping that in focus. It's amazing how that puts things in perspective. I can remember one time, I just have a handful of times where I feel like I've heard from God. But one of those times I was like, I feel like I'm so misunderstood. And God was like, I know, Jeff, it's hard, right? And I was like, oh gosh. My misunderstanding compared to yours. My suffering compared to yours. My cross compared to yours. Small, light, momentary affliction, as Paul is going to say, and yet producing something profound in us. What does Paul see that keeps him composed? Well, I think one of the little interesting tells in this chapter is that almost like for the first time in Acts, we have, if you've got anybody bring their Bible today and have red letters in their Bible, there's red letters in this part of Acts. That Jesus is speaking, and part of what he bears witness to, you're like, mine doesn't have red letters. You have to pay extra, I think, for the red letters. But there's quotes from Jesus in this that's part of his witness. As he's talking to them, he's like, Jesus said this, and then he said this, and then he said this. What we're going to see is in the next chapter, Jesus is going to say more. That Paul is hearing this affirmation, and it's part of what keeps him composed. As you think, like, how does he not flinch? How does he not react? Well, he's been hearing. He knows something that's going on, that this is right where he is supposed to be. Those first red letters that we see in Acts 20 actually are scriptural. He wasn't even there to hear them. They were probably words of Jesus written down. It is more blessed to give than to receive. But you see Paul anchored in that truth. As he's finishing his life, as he's nearing the end of his journey, that this is like part of the focus. That his desire is the blessed life. God, give me the blessed life, which we tend to associate with all the wrong things. And he's like, no, it's about giving. That blessed life is about generosity. In fact, that blessed life is identifying with the sufferings of Christ even. Jesus confronts him, Saul, why are you persecuting me? That bit of truth for him disrupts his whole game, his whole plan, his whole trajectory is altered at that place. He realizes he's been going in entirely the wrong direction. Jesus is going to say, repent, turn back, go to Damascus. And there you will be told everything that you have been assigned to do. Here's the thing, like this reality, right? How many of us live our lives with that sort of trajectory? How many of us are doing in our lives what we were assigned to do? And we're like, isn't that just for a few people? Aren't there like people out there that are assigned and others that aren't? No, I think we're all assigned. All of us have this commission given to us. All of us are here to bring this good news of Christ to the world. In whatever capacity we've been given, in whatever road that God has pointed out. Part of Paul's composure is he's listening, he's taking orders from his shepherd, and then he's following in his footsteps. This posture of surrender, I think, is really the first thing that anchors Paul. If I was going to say the first sort of truth, the first secret to his composure, is that he's surrendered to an assignment that was given to him. That he realizes is going to cost him his own sort of will, his own clutching to his way. Jesus models this so perfectly when Jesus is in the garden and he says in his prayer to the Father, not my will, but your will be done. Jesus is actually going to say, take this cup, take this assignment, but in the end, not my will, but your will be done. This self-surrender, some would say this was the victory of the cross, that Jesus goes unflinchingly from that moment to the cross. His only moment of wavering was in understanding the hardship that he faced and then laying down his life for the sake of what he was here to do. This is what maturity looks like. This is what composure looks like. Years ago, I read this book by Richard Rohr where he was talking about rites of passage, and he said there's 5 hard truths everyone needs to learn to be an adult, to become mature. Here they are. You ready for this? Life is hard. You aren't that important. It's not about you. You're not in control. You're going to die. Like, yuck. Like, imagine that as an advertising campaign. Come, become a Christian. Life is hard. You're not in control. You're going to die. You're like, most of us are like living our life running from one or more of those truths. Except that all of those are true. That life is hard. We aren't that important. We're not in control. That we're here for just a moment of time. Most marketing that we hear every single day is saying, no, life is about being comfortable. You are the most important. You are in control. You will live forever. But the more we try to clutch to those truths that aren't, the more frustrated we are, the more irritated, the more depressed, the more anxious. The pursuit of those things and trying to hold on to those things costs us life and leaves us with a life of worry and fragility. I think when we defend ourselves, when I come up and I push back, like if I'm thin-skinned and need to defend myself, it's probably because one of those truths I'm trying to protect or one of those falsehoods I'm trying to protect. Mainly comfort, that's sort of the one that, like, if I could just make everything, if I could fix all the problems and everything would be comfortable and everybody would understand and everything would be fine. But see, this isn't freedom. This is instead just another version of self-obsession. This is something in me that God is going to lead me towards again and again. Opportunities for me to let go. And that truth, when you bring it, I would love if this story was like Paul just got up there and vulnerably shared, and then everybody was like, Paul, you're amazing. Thank you. No, that mob gets angry. All of a sudden, he's back in this place of danger. What we're going to see in just a little bit is that Jesus is going to come along and say, it's okay, have courage. I'm taking you to Rome. For Paul to step into this calling that he's been given requires him to just live in that place of laying himself down and trusting that God knows what he's doing. There's a term that gets used in kind of leadership speak, this idea of self-differentiation. Have you heard this? The idea is like knowing where you end and others begin. But really, in so many ways, it just is a way of understanding integrity. Self-differentiation is the ability to maintain your own sense of identity, values, and boundaries while remaining emotionally connected to others, especially during times of stress or conflict. This is the thing. How do we stay in this place of truthfulness, in this place of identity and integrity, but not disconnected? Disconnect is sort of my go-to self-protection, right? I can stay in my integrity as long as I can just go home and be by myself. Then I'm safe, right? This is why, my tendency to sort of Irish goodbye from parties. Does anybody else do this? Where you're at this party and you're like, where'd Jeff go? I'm protecting my integrity. Now, as an introvert, right, you're I only have so much, but I think when life gets harder, life gets difficult, it's super easy to isolate or to go off by yourself and just protect yourself there. Or to lose your integrity and just be what everybody else wants you to be. But this idea of staying in your integrity and staying engaged, that's the assignment. This is what Paul does. He's in this place of safety and he's saying to the centurion, let me go talk to him. And he comes out and says, my brothers, my fathers. He comes in and empathizes with them. He stays connected. This is probably kind of what Jesus is getting right at when he says to turn the other cheek. That as Christians, we stay in this place of truthfulness, but we move towards that place where the confrontation happens. We bring our presence into that place, and then through that posture, things change. Paul doesn't miss the opportunity to do what we see he was called to do. Ananias is going to say this, you've been chosen to be a witness. And Paul stands there in front of the people, does not talk about himself, does not defend what he's done. Instead, he witnesses. This is who Jesus is. The fulfillment. The one who we've been prophesying for years has finally come. He points his whole life towards Jesus and says, this is the way forward. Now, in the end, Paul understands, I think, this deep-rootedness that he doesn't stand there alone. One of the most powerful things about the gospel is that Christ dwells within him. He stands up there and exhibits this presence because the presence of God is close at hand. That God continues to show up through Paul's journey to direct him and to steer him. And we've seen this earlier in Acts 2, where he's Paul has this plan to head here, and Jesus is actually, no. Left turn, I want you to go over here. Interrupting his journey all along the way to reassure him that there is a plan. At one point, Jesus is going to say, get out of Jerusalem. They're not going to accept your testimony. And so Jesus ushers him out of there to a place of safety. But as we see here, Jesus is now leading him back to Jerusalem towards that place where they still aren't going to accept his testimony. But Jesus is pointing out oh, don't worry, there's a plan. I think this second sense of composure comes from the reassurance of God's presence with us. The more we walk through those trials and realize God is with me, it anchors us, it grounds us in a reality. I love how Jesus with his disciples, he's out on the Sea of Galilee and that storm hits and they, of course, all panic and they're looking at Jesus, who it turns out is asleep in the front of the boat. And they get so angry with him, what's the matter with you? We're going to die out here. And Jesus yawns. He's wipes the sleep out of his eyes. And then says to him oh, you little doubters, why are you so afraid? And the answer is obviously the storm, Jesus. Obviously we're afraid. We're going to die out here. And he's and the storm goes away. And what's the message? I think we would love it to be that the storms, if Jesus is in your boat, the storms go away. And you're that's not the message. The message is, if Jesus is in your boat, even when he's asleep, you're safe. That Paul knows Jesus is going to carry him through all the way to the end, that he is going to finish his assignment. And it gives him this resilience, this lack of fear. Jesus is going to give him that reassurance, like I've given you an assignment, I'm with you by his presence. And gives him this purpose that is bigger than him. His life is just not about him. When we think, I'm not that important, but Jesus is like, yeah, but you're a part of my plan. That there's something going on and that we have this opportunity to have Jesus move us like chess pieces in this game of rescuing the world, bringing salvation to humanity. As Jesus directs Paul's steps, he understands that he's got this purpose. And he's going to say later in Philippians, I know that I would love to just be ultimately with Jesus, but for now it's more important that I remain here with you, that I carry out this purpose that I've been given. Do you know that purpose for your life? Do you see your life through that understanding of assignment? Viktor Frankl says, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Part of Paul's composure, he's dedicated to a cause greater than himself. That this gives him a steadiness. Frankl, who's a survivor of the Holocaust, is going to go, that's what allows you to endure and survive in the worst of circumstances. That we live a life that is filled with meaning and the opportunity. Unfortunately, the crowd goes at this point into a rage. As he talks about, this is the purpose. We're bringing this to the whole world. This is the good news, is this compassionate love and grace of God is for everybody. There's a whole group of people that don't want to hear it. This is ours, not theirs. This is mine, not yours. That I can take this blessing and somehow contain it for myself and have it without realizing that the second we do, it kills it. It rots. The good news requires us to first look at hard truths and realize that it decenters us. At first, it strips us of our specialness. I mean, how many of you deep down just want to be special? And it's going well, you're not. And then again, you are. It's a profound thing that when this sort of veneer comes down, then who you are actually starts to really shine. The way that you were distinctly created to be. It's not in all those vain pursuits and all those ways that other people give us credit or prestige or recognition. He's going, it's none of those things. And the longer we live in that reality, the more fearful we are that we're going to get found out. Or if it's about our performance, that we're not going to do as well as we did last week. Constant areas of insecurity. Set free when we let go of these sort of ambitions. One of my favorite examples of this is Henry Nouwen. And he was this Yale, Harvard professor and had written all these books. And God called him to go work with this little community of disabled people called L'Arche. And he's it was there that I learned how to love, because they were so unimpressed. They didn't care about any of my accolades, right? He's just going, the whole value of these people was whether or not you loved them. How many of us are spending our time focused on drawing this sort of attention to ourselves in order that we would know our worth? Nouwen says, to live in the world without belonging to the world summarizes the essence of the spiritual life. The spiritual life keeps us aware that our true house is not the house of fear, in which the powers of hatred and violence rule, but the house of love where God resides. That house of love is Paul's heart. It's your heart. If you've accepted Christ into that space, he's gone, I come in that I would inhabit that space and be with you. And that love casts out fear when we understand that love. It sets all these things in order. When Jesus comes in, he comes in with this question. I love this about Peter when he's like, bumbling along as the disciple. But Jesus asks this question, who do you say that I am? And Peter is going to say, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, guess what? You didn't figure that out. You were shown that. Which that alone is profound. Jesus showing us, Jesus alive, Jesus at work, pointing us to these deeper truths. Peter's going to say, you're the Messiah. And Jesus is going to say, this is who you are. Gives him a new name. You're Peter. On this rock I'll build my church. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Gives him a new name, a new identity. Paul similarly went through his own name change. That Paul was Saul, who was a reference, within the Hebrew culture to one of their great kings. But he changed his name to Paul, and partly because he's going into Greece, and so he chooses a Greek name, but Paul means small. There was something about this yielding, this humility that allowed his heart to be set free and transformed. What it gave him is this heart that was resilient and purified. He stands there with this sense of self-control and peace and pours out the affection and grace. And this is how our lives shine. This is what the work God is doing in us is for, that might be our response. Is that when we're criticized? Is that when we're misunderstood? Is that when somebody cuts in front of us driving through town? Or do we come in and defend our rights and protect our space? Is our response this heart of generosity? And the truth is, you can't do that yourself. This isn't something that you can set out to do. It's something, like Frankel's saying, that has to be done in you. It's fruit. And Jesus makes this really clear in John 15. He's going, this fruit doesn't come quickly. It comes through abiding in me. And this reassuring but kind of stark truth that apart from that vine, we as the branch, we wither. We cannot bear this fruit on our own. It comes from walking in faithful step with Jesus. This is where this self-control, this perseverance, this gentleness, this posture of love comes from. Jesus is going to visit Paul in prison in Acts 23 in our next chapter, and he says, take courage. As you've testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Paul's going to stand in front of the leader of the world at this time and bear witness. This reminder that what God is doing isn't just some haphazard plan. There is purpose behind it that Paul can trust in. It's going to take him a while to get there, but he's going to be in front of all these leaders as he goes. And he's just going to simply bear witness to this truth. This is who Jesus is, and this is what he did. Christ crucified. This is the power of God. This is the nature of ultimate reality. This is the good news, and it's for everyone. And for us, our capacity to understand that comes with our own willingness to lay our lives down too. And this is the work that God is inviting us into. He's saying, remain in me, and through you I will bear fruit. That sort of grace is something that only he can do. By us yielding to that work, the true fruit is born. My little Balthazar reference today, but he talks about how most of us are just, as these branches, are so caught up in our leaves, not the fruit. He says we mistake the leaves for fruit. That maybe the leaves are what we can kind of muster up, but ultimately in the end, the fruit is something that God has to do. It's slow work. It takes a lifetime. But the things that you've been through, the difficulties, the challenges, the things even that you worry, these become invitations for you to grow into this image of Christ for the sake of the world. As we do, as we lay ourselves down, as we enter in with that posture of surrender, we become anchored We become rooted. It's the house that is built on the rock. Paul prays this prayer to the Ephesians, and I want to pray it for us today, and then we're going to go to the Lord's table. But he says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know his love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. That is composure. That is what is offered. That is what this fruit does. A life laid down for the sake of others is rooted and grounded in his love.